The iPhone 15 Pro Max has the exact same camera hardware as the iPhone 14 Pro Max from last year, with the exception of the zoom module, which is now a 5x module as opposed to the 3. However, we do get a number of software improvements, like the upgraded Smart HDR5 processing from Smart HDR4, the new default 24 megapixel resolution as opposed to 12, and a couple of other small changes too. But are all of these enough to make a difference? Well, we'll find out in 35 individual tests, from HDR samples to RAWs to cinematic modes to macro to zoom at multiple ranges and everything in between. Right after our sponsor, Spigen. Check out Spigen's new range of stylish and protective iPhone 15 Pro cases by using the links below, as well as later in the video where we'll be doing a drop test. And now, back to the video. So, in our first outdoor shot, we can immediately see Smart HDR5 making a big difference, with the sky being blown out on the 14 Pro Max, whereas the 15 Pro Max still retains the highlight details, although at the expense of a slightly darker image. Now, if we zoom in, we can see that the 15 Pro Max has considerably more detail, as its 48 megapixel sensor is now outputting a 24 megapixel photo rather than the 12 on the 14 Pro Max. And the difference is definitely noticeable right away. What I did find quite interesting here was the file size. The 15 Pro Max's was larger at 2.5 megs, however, it wasn't quite double of the 14 Pro's 1.6 megs, given the double in resolution. In the second outdoor shot, which was shot directly facing the sun, we can see how the sun is a bit better exposed on the 15 Pro Max. Also, those lens flare rings are reduced thanks to the new coating on the lens. However, I would have loved to have seen some brighter shadows, as they are a bit darker than the 14 Pro's is, and some detail is lost. We can see a similar result in our third outdoor shot, where even though the sun is better exposed, we do lose some of the shadow detail, as the 15 Pro Max does underexpose the image to preserve those highlight details. And same as before, once we zoom in, we can see how significantly more detailed the new default 24 megapixel photos are. Also, quick reminder, we are doing a giveaway of both the iPhone 15 Pro and the iPhone 15 to celebrate the launch of our new wallpaper app called Wallpapers. Wallpapers features cross-platform cloud sync between iOS and Android, aka Wallpapers, all of which you can try for free with our 30-day free trial, and details on how to enter the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro giveaway are in the description. And moving on to some indoor shots, at first glance, these two photos look identical. However, once we zoom into the left-hand side, we can see that the 15 Pro Max is able to retain more of the highlights to the point where the locale coffee sign is fully readable. And again, that increased resolution makes a huge difference when it comes to the textures and the overall detail. In the second indoor shot, we can see how Smart HDR5 on the 15 Pro is able to retain more of the highlight details, with the clouds in the sky being fully visible as opposed to blown out on the 14 Pro. I also love how sharp the texture of the sofa is once we zoom in. So what about zoom? Well, at 2x, they both use their sensor crop feature, and surprisingly, the 15 Pro Max is a tiny bit better here, likely due to the newer image processing. We get a bit less noise and a slightly more detailed image, but not by much. Moving on to 5x, this is where the 15 Pro Max starts using that dedicated 5x module, whereas the 14 Pro Max would be using its 3x and then zooming in digitally to 5. And I gotta say, the difference between them is incredibly small. I mean, sure, the 15 Pro Max is more detailed towards the top of the boy, once we zoom in, but not by a significant amount. Zooming into 10x, that's where we start seeing a bigger difference, with the 15 Pro Max being more detailed with less noise. But again, the 14 Pro Max isn't noticeably worse, just a tiny bit worse. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. The 15 Pro Max can now zoom up to 25 times digitally, whereas the 14 Pro Max is stuck to 15x, which we then crop to 25x. And it turns out that even though the 15 Pro Max is better and the text is more readable, the difference is really, really small, I would say. And I don't know, I'm a bit disappointed, as I was hoping to see some big zoom improvements with the 15 Pro Max, but that's not really the case here. When it comes to portrait mode pets, the 15 Pro Max does actually perform a bit worse, as in it fails to separate Ren's individual hairs like the 14 Pro did. However, it does add a more gradual depth of field, and the sky retains more details thanks to its improved Smart HDR5 processing. When it comes to portrait mode person, this time, the 15 Pro Max has better edge detection, if you take a look at my hair, so maybe it does actually have that updated LiDAR module that got rumored before. And again, the sky does have more highlight retention on the 15 Pro Max. Although the colors on the 14 Pro Max are a bit more natural, with my jacket looking a bit blue on the 15. We also took a portrait mode of an object to see if there are any improvements, and it seems like the 15 managed to get a tiny more of the plant separated from the background. However, when we compare the same thing just with one plant, The background separation looks to be exactly the same, so yeah, no visible improvements here. Now, filming these camera comparisons can be quite tricky, as we usually carry a lot of phones with us, and therefore the chance of dropping one is quite high. So that is why we have to keep them protected with our sponsor, Spigen. Spigen's cases for the iPhone 15 Pro Max are great for keeping your phone unique and protected. As an Apple fan, this awesome classic C1 MagFit case that debuts with the iPhone 15s is a great throwback to the iMac G3. Plus, it also comes in blue, graphite, and ruby. The techie teardown Ultra Hybrid 01 finally comes in white, giving a completely different vibe to the black version. The durable Spigen Tough Armor MagFit is their toughest case, and we are going to drop it 3, 2, 1. Alright, let's take a look. The back is fine, the sides are fine. Yeah, everything is fine. The case also comes with a kickstand, so you can watch videos hands-free. My personal favorite is the Ultra Hybrid MagFit Frost with its translucent back, which also gives you a nice tactile feel. Each of these MagFit cases works perfectly with their OneTap Pro MagFit charger and O-Mag rings, which come in a variety of colors. Check out Spigen by using the links below. And now, back to the video. So what about the Ultroid module? There are some improvements when it comes to detail. If we zoom into the building in the center, we can see a bit more texture, and the highlight detail in the sky is a bit better preserved, but yeah, other than that, no major changes here. Same for the second Ultroid shot, where part of the sky is blown out on the 14 Pro, but preserved on the 15 Pro thanks to Smart HDR5. And again, once we zoom in, we can see slightly more detail from the 15 Pro Max, but the difference is extremely minimal. We've also tested the Ultroid module indoors to see if there will be any improvements. And honestly, there are some slight improvements. Like if we zoom into the center, the 15 Pro Max looks a bit higher res, although not by a lot. And if we take a look at the colored lights, the 15 Pro Max seems to expose them a bit better, but yeah, other than that, these two photos are identical. Macro is an interesting one, as it seems like the 15 Pro Max just decided to saturate the image to some pretty insane levels. I do much prefer it myself, although the 14 Pro Max was way more realistic here. And same goes for the second macro shots. The 15 Pro Max looks way better, although this is mostly to do with the image processing. Also, the flower in this shot was white, with the yellow bit only being in the middle. So the 14 Pro Max was definitely the more realistic one here. Next up, we tested the raw performance to see if the 15 Pro Max gets any improvements to its dynamic range. And yeah, it doesn't look like this is the case, with both phones having the exact same level of dynamic range, which makes sense as they both use the exact same sensors. Now, even though they use the exact same main sensor, by default, the 15 Pro Max takes those 24 megapixel photos as opposed to the 12 on the 14 Pro Max. Now, on both phones, you can take 48 megapixel RAWs, and now with iOS 17, you can also take 48 megapixel HEIF photos on both. And comparing both side by side, there doesn't seem to be any visible difference, either in terms of the processing or in terms of the sharpness. In terms of 4K 60 video, we couldn't see any improvements at all in terms of the sharpness or image processing, so it looks like the Smart HDR5 improvements only apply to photos. However, we still get some video improvements, as we can now switch between all lenses when recording 4K 60 video, whereas before this was limited to 4K 30, and you also get the ability to record and vlog, if you want to grade it later, as well as ProRes 60 FPS if you use an external USB-C SSD, or you can also do this natively with the new Blackmagic app. Disclaimer, Apple still has a 1080p 30 FPS limit for internal ProRes on the 128GB models of the iPhone 15 Pro, even though they do no longer mention this anywhere on their website. Cinematic mode looks about the same on both, maybe with slightly better hair separation on the 15 Pro Max, but yeah, definitely no major improvements here. Same thing in terms of Ultroid video, both phones look exactly the same HDR processing, same level of detail, no visible improvements whatsoever. Action mode does seem to be better though, with slightly better stabilization and also a more detailed image. It also seems to be a bit higher res, despite having the same 2.8K resolution, which might be a bit more noticeable when you pause the video. Now, the 15 Pro Max does feature an anti-glare lens coating, which should help with the lens flares at night. And looking at these two samples, it does make a difference. The glare circles are gone, both the small and the big one, and we don't get as much glare from the main light either. But if you were expecting this lens coating to completely remove the glare, this is not going to be the case. Moving on to actual night mode, I wasn't expecting to see this as they both have the exact same main sensor, but the 15 Pro Max is better. The pink plant is sharper, the colors look more natural, the texture on the wall is also more detailed. The only place where the 15 Pro Max is worse is the floor, where the 14 Pro Max does have a more defined texture. In the second night mode shot, we have a massive difference. Just look at how much more detailed the 15 Pro Max is. The grass is perfectly visible as opposed to the muddy look on the 14 Pro Max, and the leaves are also perfectly in focus too, which the 14 Pro Max did struggle with. So yeah, huge upgrade here. And in this third night mode shot, we do have way more light than in the other two, and again, the 15 Pro Max is more detailed if you zoom into the red flowers. The brickwork texture on the wall is also more detailed. And I'm honestly impressed. It seems like night mode is considerably better on the 15 Pro Max despite no hardware improvements. Like, literally everything is simply thanks to the switch from Smart HDR4 to Smart HDR5. So what about zooming in at night? Well, at 5x, the 15 Pro Max does look better, but not by a massive amount, which does surprise me. However, once we zoom in further to 10x, that's where we get the big difference, with the 15 Pro Max being considerably clearer and with a lot less noise. So what about the Ultroid at night? Well, I was extremely impressed with this one. This is a huge improvement. Just take a look at how much clearer the 15 Pro Max is. Like, you can even see the individual strands of grass, whereas on the 14 Pro Max, everything is just super muddy and noisy. The tree is perfectly visible on the 15 Pro Max, and same goes for the texture in the fence and the house. Yeah, this is literally the biggest improvement in night mode, and it's when it comes to the Ultroid. We've also tested night portrait to see if Apple made any improvements, and unfortunately, you still cannot use night mode on portrait mode shots on any other lens aside from the 1x. Now, 1x looked very zoomed out, so we had to use 2x here, so none of them have night mode enabled. And even though the 14 Pro Max looks more stylized, I actually had no purple and blue lights on me, they were behind me, so the 15 Pro Max is way more realistic here. However, the edge separation is slightly better on the 14 Pro Max. So what about night video? Well, we filmed this in almost pitch black, and surprisingly, the 15 Pro Max does actually capture a bit more light, or at least the footage is more detailed and a bit less noisy. And the difference isn't huge, but it is definitely there. Moving on to the front-facing camera, the sensors are exactly the same. So the improvements are all thanks to the switch from the Smart HDR4 to 5. And you can see how the clouds in the distance have retained more detail on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And if we take a look at the second shot in direct sunlight, the 15 Pro Max isn't perfect, but it does manage to retain a lot more highlight detail, whereas the 14 Pro Max simply just has a pure white sky. When it comes to front-facing video, I'll let you guys watch this one first. Okay, so this is a front-facing video test between the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Let me know which one handles the highlights in the sky better, which one is sharper, which one has better colors, and also which one sounds better. Is it the iPhone 15 Pro Max or the iPhone 14 Pro Max? So I wasn't really seeing any improvements with the 15 Pro Max here. The sky looked about the same on both, and again, it seems like the Smart HDR5 improvements only apply to photos and not videos. Now, in terms of audio, the 15 Pro Max to me did sound quite a bit better, crispier, and also with more bass. We've also tested front portrait mode, and here, the 14 Pro Max did better, as the 15 messed up and brought the tree behind me in focus and multiple areas across the image. And in terms of front night mode, this is where things got weird, as we've realized that the iPhones will always use your display's brightness as the brightness of the front flash. So if you happen to have your display brightness set to something that's too high or too low, your front-facing photos would end up looking very different. But yeah, I do prefer the 15 Pro Max in all cases here, even though in some cases the photos are quite bad. So in conclusion, I am quite happy with the improvements that Smart HDR5 brought us, as they finally fixed the blown out sky issues that have plagued the iPhone 14 and 13 series. I just find it odd how Apple couldn't simply release a software update to fix all of these, like, Samsung often does, and instead they literally had to release an entirely new phone. Now, Smart HDR5 did also have a negative impact on the shadows, as most images turned out to also be darker, but yeah, hopefully Apple will fix this soon with the iPhone 16. I'm also very happy with the night mode improvement, especially on the Ultroid. That was a complete surprise, and I'm honestly shocked that those were all done thanks to Smart HDR5 and no hardware changes at all. And I was also really impressed with the sharpness of the new 24 megapixel images. However, this could have also been a software update on the 14 Pro Max, and if you really want high-res images, you can just toggle the new 48 megapixel HIF mode. But yeah, I was quite disappointed in terms of the zoom. I was genuinely hoping that Apple would give us some outstanding level of zoom, since all of their competitors have already had impressive zoom levels for the past 3 to 4 years now. But instead, what we got is something like a 10% improvement over the 14 Pro Max, which is very, very minor. I guess the only notable zoom improvement was indeed in low light at 10x, where the 15 Pro Max was considerably better. Do check out our S23 Ultra versus 15 Pro Max camera comparison too. Don't forget about our iPhone 15 and 15 Pro giveaway, more details in the description, and stay tuned for more iPhone 15 videos coming soon. I'm Daniel, this is ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.